Amidst the heart of a savage snowstorm, an enigmatic steed materializes at the door of a secluded woman's cabin, guiding her toward a man stranded on the mountainside. As Clara dares everything to rescue him, she must confront the inner terrors of intimacy and the life from which she has long fled. Will this fateful encounter with a stranger and his extraordinary horse unlock the secret to mending her fractured heart, or will she withdraw into the isolation she so well knows? Before we plunge into the full narrative, please share in the comments where you are watching or listening from, like and subscribe. Your support inspires us to share more moving stories. The wind roared through towering pines, its icy breath rattling the loose shingles of the cabin roof. Snow cascaded in relentless torrents, blanketing the ground so densely that it blurred the very edges of the world. Inside the humble one-room cabin, Clara Winter sat beside a crackling fireplace, her slender fingers tightly grasping a steaming mug of tea. Although its warmth seeped into her hands, her heart remained unyieldingly cold, a chill to which she had grown accustomed in her self-imposed solitude. Adjusting her time-worn wool sweater, its cuffs frayed yet still her most cherished garment, Clara let her auburn hair, slightly tousled, fall in soft waves past her shoulders, catching the golden firelight. Her pale skin appeared nearly translucent in the flickering glow, while her blue eyes, shadowed by sleepless nights and haunting memories, revealed a sorrow she could not escape. On the creaking wooden floor, she wore rugged leather boots, scuffed by years yet enduring for the brutal mountain winters. Surveying the sparse cabin furnishings, a small wooden table, mismatched chairs, and a solitary bed tucked in a corner, with only a dusty bookshelf and a framed photograph of a younger self embraced by her parents, the silence spoke volumes of her isolated life. The loneliness, once softened by busy tasks like chopping firewood, mending garments, or drawing water from the creek when unfrozen, now pressed heavily upon her as the storm confined her indoors with her thoughts. Closing her eyes, her mind wandered back to the bustling city she left behind, the constant murmur of voices and the sharp sting of betrayal when those she loved moved on without her. She had sought refuge here from the clamor and painful reminders, yet the silence proved as deafening as the noise. Suddenly, a sharp knock shattered the storm's rhythm. Clara's eyes snapped open as the sound repeated, 3 measured taps on the wooden door. At first, she suspected a trick of the wind, but the knock came again. Undeniably, someone or something stood at her door. Her pulse quickened. Few dared venture this deep into the mountains amid a raging blizzard. Setting her mug aside, she reached for her coat and wrapped it tightly as she approached the door. The floor creaked under her weight, the sound unervingly loud against the storm's muffled roar. "Hello," she called hesitantly, receiving no reply. Unlatching the door just enough to peer outside, a gust of wind flung stinging snow into her face. Through the swirling white, she discerned a dark silhouette, a horse with large, desperate eyes glimmering beneath a mane flecked with snow. The animal staggered forward, its breath erupting in frantic bursts of steam. Clara froze, her mind racing with questions. Where had it come from? To whom did it belong? And why was it here, as if fated to find her? The horse faltered again, and Clara's instincts overrode her fear. Stepping out into the biting snow, her boots soaking instantly, she extended a cautious hand. "Easy, girl," she murmured softly, uncertain whether addressing a mare or a stallion. "You're okay." The horse halted, its dark eyes locking with hers, and in that moment, Clara felt an electric jolt of recognition, as though the creature could peer straight through her fragile defenses to the wounded soul beneath. In that silent communion, a shared sorrow and longing for connection passed between them in a world that often felt unbearably harsh. "You're freezing," she whispered, stepping closer, and observed its thin, snow-crusted coat and trembling legs. "What happened to you? Where's your rider?" Her hand gently brushed the horse's neck, its coarse hair stiff with ice, and the animal emitted a low, mournful sound that twisted something deep within her. Memories of arriving in these mountains with nothing but a battered suitcase and a shattered heart flooded back, feeling as lost as the creature before her. "I know," she whispered. "I know what it means to be alone." As the wind howled anew, compelling her to act, Clara steeled herself. "Come on," she said with newfound firmness, guiding the horse toward the small barn beside the cabin, its roof partially hidden beneath snowdrifts. The creature followed, its steps unsteady. Inside the barn, Clara ignited a lantern, casting warm light across the room as the shivering horse stood center stage. Gently, she retrieved an old blanket from a chest, draping it over its back, then began brushing away the snow and checking for injuries. "Poor thing," she murmured softly, her hands tenderly gliding along its legs. A worn leather saddle rested in place, its faded monogram e.g. arousing her curiosity, yet her immediate concern remained the horse's well-being. As she worked, she could not shake the feeling that the animal had come to her for a reason. Its quiet resilience and will to survive amid the storm resonated with her own hidden struggles. For the first time in many years, Clara did not feel utterly alone. Resting her hand on the horse's neck, her voice barely audible, she vowed, "We're going to figure this out. Just you and me." The horse's neck. "If we're doing this, you're in charge," she declared while gently patting its shoulder. "But don't you dare let me get lost, you hear?" The animal emitted a low, affirming nicker, which Clara interpreted as consent. With that, she swung open the barn door, bracing herself against the relentless wind that surged in, stinging her face and stealing her breath. "Lead the way," she managed to say, her voice nearly swallowed by the storm's fury. The horse advanced, its movements confident despite the heavy snow that had nearly reduced it to trembling on its knees. Clara trailed behind, clutching the rope with determination and sinking her steps to the measured cadence of the horse's stride to maintain her balance. The tempest enshrouded them, a swirling, unforgiving force that obliterated familiar landmarks. Though Clara was uncertain of their destination, the creature's steadfast bearing, with its head held high and ears swiveling as if listening for a secret only it could discern, offered silent assurance. As they trudged deeper into the endless white, doubts churned in her mind. Was this truly the right path? Was she endangering herself for a mere fleeting chance? Yet every determined step of the horse quieted her hesitations. It wasn't merely instinct that propelled the animal, but a deep, resolute purpose. Time lost meaning as the storm stretched minutes into seemingly endless hours. Her limbs ached from the unyielding cold, and her breaths came out in sharp, short gasps just when she felt she could endure no further. Then, abruptly, the horse halted, its body tense and alert. "What is it?" Clara demanded, squinting into the white oblivion. The wind roared around them, and for a moment all was blank, until the horse stamped its hoof and directed its gaze toward a shadowy form looming in the distance. Clara followed its look, and her heart pounded as she beheld a figure, half buried in the drifts of snow. "Oh my God!" she whispered, then broke into a desperate run despite the deep, treacherous drifts slowing her steps. Reaching the figure, she collapsed to her knees, frantically brushing away the snow. It was a man, his face ghostly, his lips tinged blue, his body eerily unmoving. With trembling fingers, Clara pressed against his neck and nearly broke down when she felt a faint, reassuring pulse. "We've found him," she murmured to the horse, her voice quivering. "You did it." Nearby, the horse's breath emerged in visible puffs as it observed her with an intensity that bordered on human. Clara glanced back at the man, her thoughts racing with the urgency of what must come next. "This isn't over," she realized. "Not by any stretch." "This story took us so long," she interjected, her voice a hushed reminder to the unseen audience. "So if you're enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. It means the world to us." Now, back to the story. The wind howled as if intent on tearing them apart, its icy fingers probing every gap in Clara's layered clothing. Her knees sank into the snow, the biting cold penetrating her jeans as she knelt beside the man. His face was as pale as the endless drifts, his dark hair matted against his forehead. With deliberate care, Clara brushed the snow from his coat, her fingers stiff from the chill. The man's body was unervingly still, save for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. "You're alive," she whispered, relief mingling with urgency, even as her breath emerged in quick, visible puffs against the frigid air. Glancing over her shoulder at the vigilant horse, she said, "We need to move him, fast." Her mind raced, knowing there was no time to lose. Quickly, she examined him with her limited first-aid skills. His leg was twisted unnaturally, the surrounding snow tinged with blood, a likely broken bone. Her fingers grazed a makeshift tourniquet tied above the injury, snug enough to slow the bleeding yet not tight enough to cut off circulation. "He tried to save himself," she murmured, a mix of admiration and urgency in her tone, "but it isn't enough." Removing her scarf, she wrapped it around his neck, shielding him from the fierce wind. The challenge was immense, getting him back to the cabin when his weight, compounded by the deep snow, made every step a monumental effort. "I need your help," she addressed the horse, her tone resolute despite the storm. Though she expected no reply, the animal's lowering of its head confirmed its understanding. Summoning all her strength, Clara dragged the man closer to the waiting horse. Her muscles screamed in protest, yet she gritted her teeth and pressed on. Once he was securely beside the horse, she paused momentarily to figure out how best to secure him. Hold still," she instructed softly, tying the rope into a makeshift harness around the horse's chest. It was far from elegant, but it had to suffice. Placing her hands beneath his arms, she heaved, her boots digging into the snow for traction. Inch by inch, his weight shifted until he finally settled atop the horse's broad back. "There," she panted triumphantly, stepping back to catch her breath. "Now, it's up to you." The horse snorted softly, its breath swirling in the cold, and Clara took that as affirmation. Clutching the lead rope, she began the arduous trek back to the cabin. The storm battled with every step, the wind, a relentless force, the snow, clinging to her lashes and blurring her vision, and her legs, burning with effort amid deep drifts. Yet the horse pressed forward, its gait unwavering despite the added burden. As Clara marveled at its quiet strength and resilience, a realization dawned upon her. Though she had never considered herself a horse person, the creature's unwavering will to survive resonated deeply within her. "Thank you for reminding me," she murmured softly as the horse shifted its weight, pressing gently against her, as though offering solace. Clara closed her eyes, allowing the tender moment to settle deep within her chest. At last, she straightened up. "I must get back," she stated, patting Comet's neck. "He's not yet out of the woods," she added. Inside the cabin, the man lay unmoving, and Clara sank into the chair beside his bed, fatigue weighing upon her limbs. With deliberate care, she retrieved a damp cloth and tenderly wiped his face, murmuring gentle reassurances more for her own comfort than his. "You are not allowed to die." Her firm words carried the weight of their arduous journey to bring him here. As she worked, her mind drifted to memories of her parents, faces preserved in a faded photograph on the mantel, her father's booming laugh and her mother's quiet strength. They had always assured her she could overcome anything, even after the accident that tore them away. Yet, after their departure, those words had become hollow. She had sought refuge in these mountains to escape the burden of her grief, but it clung to her like an unyielding shadow. Glancing at the man, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that mirrored her own, she perceived in him the delicate fragility of life, a tenuous thread binding all to this world. Determined, she vowed not to let him slip away. Hours blurred as she tended to the fire, monitored his pulse, and refilled a water bowl. Near dawn, Clara's head finally drooped until a soft groan stirred her awake. Her heart raced as she glanced at the bed. The man's eyes, a striking hazel, now stared open, catching the fire's light. Disoriented, his gaze flitted about before settling on her. "You're awake," Clara said, her tone gentle yet laden with relief. Leaning forward with her elbows resting on her knees, she asked, "How do you feel?" "As if trampled by a stampede of buffalo." He rasped, his voice rough but unmistakably alive, his eyes drifting first to his injured leg and then back to her. You saved me." "Your horse saved you," Clara corrected softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I merely followed orders," he replied, frowning as fragments of memory resurfaced. "Comet, that's what I call him," Clara explained warmly. "He led me to you in the storm." His face softened, tension easing from his brow. "Good boy," he murmured in a voice thick with gratitude. Clara reached for the bowl of water, extending it to him. "Here, drink slowly." His trembling hands accepted the bowl, and as he finished, he sank back against the pillow, his strength visibly waning. "What is your name?" she inquired gently. "Ethan," he whispered. His voice, barely audible, carried a fragile hope as Clara nodded. "Well, Ethan Gray, you're fortunate to be alive." A faint smile played on his lips. "I owe you my life." "No," she insisted, glancing toward the barn. "You owe it to Comet." A brief pause allowed the words to hang between them before she added, "This story took us so long. If you're enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us." Now, back to the story. As the morning neared, the wind screamed like it sought to tear them asunder, its icy claws probing every gap in Clara's layered garments. Her knees pressed into the snow, and the biting cold seeped through her jeans as she knelt beside the man, whose face was as pale as the snow surrounding him and whose dark hair lay matted against his forehead. Gently, Clara brushed the snow from his coat. Her fingers, stiff with chill, moved methodically. The man's body remained unervingly still except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. "You're alive," she whispered once more, her relief palpable, though her breaths emerged as quick, white puffs in the frigid air. Glancing over at Comet, she declared, "We must move him, quickly." Her mind raced. Time was of the essence. With her limited first-aid knowledge, she inspected him. His leg lay twisted in an unnatural angle, the nearby snow tinged with blood, a sign of a likely fracture. Her fingertips brushed a makeshift tourniquet tied just above the injury, snug enough to slow the bleeding yet not so tight as to cut off circulation. "He tried to save himself," she murmured, admiration and urgency mingling in her tone, "but it isn't sufficient." Removing her scarf, she wrapped it around his neck, shielding him from the harsh wind. Faced with the daunting task of returning him to the cabin amid deep, unyielding snow, she called upon the horse for aid. "I need your help," she said, her voice resolute despite the raging storm. Expecting silence, she was reassured when the horse lowered its head in understanding. Summoning every ounce of strength, Clara dragged the man closer to the steadfast creature. Her muscles screamed in protest, but with gritted teeth, she pressed on. Once he was secure beside the horse, she paused briefly, strategizing how to secure him properly. "Hold, stay still," she instructed softly, tying the rope into a makeshift harness around the horse's broad chest. Though inelegant, it would suffice. Placing her hands beneath his arms, she hoisted him onto the horse's expansive back, inch by inch, until he settled firmly. "There," she panted, stepping back to catch her breath. "Now it's up to you." The horse emitted a soft snort, its warm breath visible in the cold, and Clara took that as affirmation. Clutching the lead rope tightly, she began the arduous trek back to the cabin, battling the storm's fierce onslaught with every step. The wind pushed against her like an unseen adversary, snow clung stubbornly to her lashes, and her legs burned as she navigated deep drifts. Yet, the unwavering gait of the horse filled her with quiet resolve. Even as she marveled at its strength and resilience, she felt a deep kinship with it, as if their fates were intertwined. She set the bucket aside and offered a carrot with a small, tender smile as Comet delicately accepted it from her outstretched hand. "I don't know how you managed it, but you saved his life. Both of you did," she whispered. Comet chewed contentedly, his large, earnest eyes fixed on her with the same unwavering intensity as before. With gentle strokes, Clara ran her fingers through the coarse, icy hair of his winter coat. "Here, something else," she murmured softly. "Stubborn, brave, a little too clever for your own good. Reminds you of anyone?" The horse nudged her shoulder lightly, prompting a soft laugh that warmed her spirit. Over the past few days, Comet's unflinching calm and quiet strength had awakened a part of her that she thought was long buried. Meanwhile, Clara's thoughts drifted as she brushed Comet's coat and checked his legs for any signs of strain, all the while recalling Ethan's wise words about trust and showing up for those who matter. Though the idea felt foreign, she could not ignore the truth in them. Comet had been there for Ethan, and Ethan had placed his trust in her to do the same. Later, back inside the cabin, Ethan sat propped up in bed, a blanket draped over his lap, while a notebook rested in his hands. His pencil danced across the page with a subtle intensity that betrayed his condition. Clara carried a steaming mug of tea over to him and set it beside the notebook. "What are you working on?" she inquired, her curiosity piqued. Ethan lifted the notebook, revealing a rough sketch of a horse in full stride, its muscles taut and mane flowing like ribbons in the wind. It was unmistakably Comet. Clara blinked in amazement. "That's incredible," she murmured. Ethan shrugged, a hint of pride softening his expression. "Horses are simple to capture. Every line, every curve, every movement tells a story," he explained, tilting his head. "I never imagined it that way." Ethan teased gently, "You should try drawing sometime. It might surprise you." Clara snorted, "I can barely manage a straight line." Thank goodness horses aren't drawn with straight strokes. Their banter carried an undercurrent of warmth as the quiet truths of their shared experiences filled the room. Comet lingered nearby, the unspoken bond between them woven into the very air. Though Clara did not reply immediately, something in Ethan's gentle tone made her feel seen, a sensation that had long eluded her in solitude. Later, Ethan insisted on venturing out to the barn despite Clara's protests. "You're not ready," she objected, arms folded as she tried to block his path. "I need to see Comet," Ethan countered firmly. "He's been cooped up far too long, and so have I." Relenting with a playful huff, Clara wrapped his coat around his shoulders. "Fine, but don't expect me to catch you if you fall," she teased. Ethan smirked. "I'll take my chances with you by my side." Leaning heavily on a crutch fashioned from a sturdy branch, he made his way to the barn where Comet greeted him with an excited whinny, ears perked in recognition. "Hey, boy," Ethan said softly, placing a warm hand on Comet's neck, following the same path Clara had traced earlier that morning. "You've been taking care of her, haven't you?" Clara remarked with a playful roll of her eyes. "I'm pretty sure it's the other way around," Ethan retorted with a chuckle. "Perhaps it's both," he added. They spent the next hour in the barn, Ethan leaning against the wall as Clara fed and groomed Comet, while he shared anecdotes about the horses he'd trained and the invaluable lessons they had imparted. "Horses don't judge," Ethan noted, his hazel eyes locking with Clara's for a brief, meaningful moment. "They care only about how you treat them." Clara absorbed his words silently, the sentiment striking a deep chord within her. She recalled her years of isolation, the mistakes made, and the distance maintained from others. Perhaps it wasn't too late to rewrite her own story. As evening descended, Clara helped Ethan back to the cabin, where the comforting glow of the fire awaited them. Though exhaustion weighed heavily on her limbs, her determination never wavered. Inside, she settled into the routine of tending to dinner while Ethan continued to sketch, their shared silence now filled with a burgeoning sense of connection. The room held a tender calm, a soft promise of healing that had been absent for so long. She closed the notebook and handed it back slowly, her fingers lingering on the cover as if reluctant to let go. "I never imagined I'd appear that way, like I truly belong," she whispered, meeting Ethan's soft, reassuring gaze. The words settled over her like a warm blanket, soothing her in a manner she had not experienced for so long. For years, she had defined herself solely by her losses, encasing her heart in silence as if it were armor. Yet now, with Ethan and Comet by her side, that silence felt transformed into a space of endless possibility. This journey has taken a great deal of time. If you're enjoying our story, please subscribe to our channel. It means the world to us, she reminded the unseen listener before returning to the tale. The snow had melted just enough to reveal damp patches of earth and the first tentative signs of spring. Standing outside the cabin with her arms folded against the cool breeze, Clara watched as Comet grazed at the edge of the clearing. The air carried the fresh aroma of pine mixed with thawing soil, a morning promising renewal and second chances. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open, and Ethan stepped out cautiously, his weight still shifting on the crutch, though his movements now exuded newfound confidence, and his face glowed with the healthy flush that had replaced the pallor of his injury. "You're really going to leave?" Clara asked without turning to face him. Ethan paused beside her, his hazel eyes scanning the vast landscape. "It's time. I cannot keep imposing on you, and Comet needs room to stretch his legs beyond this clearing," he replied softly. Clara's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon as she murmured, "You're not imposing, truly." Ethan chuckled gently. "I never anticipated this when Comet first appeared at your door," he said, prompting Clara to smirk and add, "Definitely not." They shared a moment of companionable silence, the weight of an impending farewell hovering in the air. Clara's chest tightened at the thought of the cabin reverting to its old loneliness, a solitude she had endured for so many years, yet now that emptiness felt strangely hollow. "When will you depart?" she inquired. "Tomorrow morning," Ethan answered quietly. "I'll head to the ranch. It's nearby if you're ever curious." A faint smile played upon Clara's lips as she softly countered, "You really believe I would fit in there?" Ethan's gaze remained steady and unwavering. "I do," he assured. The remainder of the day blurred into a flurry of preparation as Clara assisted Ethan in gathering his few belongings, patching his coat and fashioning a satchel for his supplies, while her hands moved with resolute determination as if postponing the inevitable goodbye. Later that evening, after dinner, Ethan retrieved his notebook and began sketching by the fire. Clara observed him from her chair, her thoughts a tangled mix of uncertainty and longing, until she finally broke the silence by asking, "What is it like?" Ethan paused, his pencil hovering mid-stroke, and then inquired, "What do you mean?" "Clarifying," Clara said, "the ranch, living among all those horses and being enveloped by life." Ethan leaned back, a thoughtful smile emerging as he replied, "It's like waking up every day with purpose. The horses, the land, the people, all blending together into one big, imperfect family. Some days are difficult, but you always sense that you belong." Clara's heart ached at the simplicity and truth in his words. For so long, she had convinced herself that belonging was unimportant, that solitude was enough, but now with Ethan and Comet, that belief wavered. "You'd really enjoy it," Ethan added in a gentle tone, I see you working with the horses. You possess a rare patience in your heart." Clara shook her head with a rueful smile. "I wouldn't know the first thing about it," she admitted. Ethan set his notebook aside and leaned forward, his hazel eyes locking with hers as he stated, "That's the beauty of horses. They aren't concerned with what you know. They care only about how you treat them, and everything else you learn with time." His words filled the room with a warmth beyond the fire's glow. Clara looked away, her throat tightening as she whispered, "I'll think about it." The next morning, Clara stood on the porch while Ethan secured Comet's saddle. The horse eagerly pawed at the damp ground and tossed his head in anticipation. Soon, Ethan emerged just shy of the gate, his hazel eyes wide with surprise and an unmistakable warmth. "Clara, you're here," he said, his voice laced with relief as her smile brightened at the sight of him. "I figured it was high time I stopped hiding." Ethan dismounted slowly, his movements slower than before the accident, yet resolute, as he approached her, never breaking eye contact. "I wasn't sure you'd come either," Clara admitted softly, her voice barely a whisper, "but I can't remain confined in that cabin any longer, not after everything." Ethan's lips curved into a gentle smile as he stepped closer. "I'm glad you're here," he murmured, and Clara felt the weight she had carried for so long begin to melt away. "You promised you'd show me what this place is about," he added, and Clara, with a hint of playful defiance, replied, "I figured I'd take you up on that promise." Ethan chuckled, a sound that was both familiar and comforting, and the day unfolded in a whirlwind of new experiences. Ethan guided Clara through the ranch routines, feeding, grooming, and learning the subtleties of caring for so many animals. Though overwhelming at first, Clara found herself flourishing under the structured purpose. The horses, each with their distinct personality, fascinated her, and Comet, especially, remained her steadfast favorite. One afternoon, Ethan led her to the training paddock where a young mare named Willow, with a deep chestnut coat and wide, apprehensive eyes, awaited her care. "She's still green," Ethan remarked, leaning on the fence, "but I thought you might enjoy helping her." Clara raised an eyebrow. "I hardly know anything about training horses," she said. Ethan shrugged with a playful smile. "You've already mastered the most important part, patience and trust." Over time, as Willow began to relax under Clara's gentle guidance, a spark of hope and possibility blossomed within her. As dusk fell, Ethan sat by the fire sketching while Clara watched, lost in reflective thoughts until she softly asked, "What is it truly like at the ranch?" Ethan paused and then said, "It's like coming home, a place where you finally belong." Their conversation wove tenderly between memories and dreams, as if each shared word mended a piece of their broken pasts. Finally, as the night deepened with stars twinkling overhead, Ethan pressed his hand to Clara's cheek and whispered, "You're the hero here, Clara. Never forget that." With those words, Clara closed his notebook, her gaze lingering on its cover, cherishing every promise it held. In that quiet moment, as the fire crackled gently and the room filled with a soft glow, Clara felt hope stir within her, for herself, for a future beyond these mountains. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe now for more captivating stories coming your way tomorrow, she murmured.